Number 25. Thomas Gets Tricked. Also known as Thomas and Gordon in the UK dub, this is the very first Thomas episode where we are introduced to Thomas, Gordon, and the Northwestern Railway as a whole. And in this story, Gordon was so fed up with Thomas's antics that he wanted to get back at him by pulling him along with his express train, and as a result, Thomas was so tired and worn out that he vowed not to be cheeky to Gordon again. I put this as number 25 mainly because this is the very first episode of season 1, and if this episode never existed to begin with, then we never would have gotten a Thomas and Friends show at all. So therefore, I'm very thankful that this episode got televised first before Edward Helps Out, which I'll get into next. And it's also a great and enjoyable episode too. If you want to be a die-hard Thomas fan like me, then I suggest you watch this one first before binge watching the rest of the series. Number 24. Edward Helps Out. This is the second episode of season 1, and it's the very first episode starring Edward the Blue Engine. In case you didn't know, Edward is my second favorite former team member, as well as my 8th Bachmann model. And the reason why I decided to include this one is because it's Edward's first starring role in the entire show. In this story, Edward was put down by bigger engines like Gordon. This made him feel sad until his driver and fireman asked him if he would like to come out today, which brightened up Edward's spirits, much to the disappointment of the other engines. Later the next day, Edward had to help Gordon push a goods train up the steep hill so that he could get to the other side. And despite Gordon not saying thank you afterwards, Edward's crew assured Edward that he did a great job today, and that they'll give him a new coat of paint as a reward for his efforts. Fun fact, in the Railway series, Edward Helps Out was split into 2 parts. Part 1 was called Edward's Day Out, while Part 2 is titled Edward and Gordon, which was also the UK title for this episode. And in case you didn't know, in the Railway series, there were a few non-televised characters known as 87546 and 98462, try saying those 5 times fast, who were very rude to Edward and the other engines but were sent packing due to their bad behavior. There was also another red tender engine who looks identical to James, but was sent away for unknown reasons. But in the TV series, their roles were replaced by Thomas and James respectively due to budgeting constraints, which is fine, but at the same time, I would like to see 87546 and 98462 adapted into the show somehow, but with given names. But all in all, not only was Edward and Gordon a great secondary episode for the entire show, but a great start for the Railway series lore since 1945, while the second book, Thomas the Tank Engine, wasn't published until a year afterwards. And if you're a huge Edward fanatic, I suggest you watch this episode first before watching the other ones like Edward's Exploit, for instance, which I'll get into later. Number 23. Foolish Freight Cars, aka Troublesome Trucks in the UK dub. This is James's secondary starring role in season 1, the first one being James Learns a Lesson. This story takes place after the events of that episode, where James feels very sad that he won't be able to pull coaches again, nor have people see his shiny red paint again due to his incident with a passenger's bootlace. When Sir Tomahat comes to see him, he basically forgives him and orders him to fetch some trucks for him. Though James was pretty upset when the other engines like Thomas teased him about Jeremiah Jopling's bootlace. As James goes up Gordon's hill with the troublesome trucks, some of them broke free and rolled down the hill. Luckily, James never gave up as he chuffed back down the hill to reclaim the rest of his train, and slowly but surely, he managed to take the whole train all the way up to the top of the hill. And as a result, Sir Tomahat, who was on Edward's train, saw everything and congratulated James for his efforts, and says that he will keep his red coat from now on. In all honesty, this is my favorite James episode when it comes to season 1. It is part of James's important character arc in the James the Red Engine book, and this story just shows that even though we make mistakes, we can't give up because we need to put our best efforts into our lives so that way we can succeed. Also, James is my 3rd favorite member of the Steam Team because of his vain and arrogant personality, as well as his shiny red coat of paint, which makes him look more splendid than his original black livery in The Adventure Begins. Number 22 is Terrence the Tractor. When it comes to Thomas's first branch line adventures, as well as winter-themed episodes in general, This is definitely one of my favorite ones from that category. In this story, Thomas was introduced to Terrence the Tractor, who Thomas judged by saying that his wheels are ugly, when in reality, they are caterpillar tracks that can let him go anywhere. But Thomas didn't seem to care at first until he came across a huge pile of snow one winter day. Luckily, Terrence came to his rescue, and Thomas learned that his caterpillar tracks were very useful. This episode marks the very first time when an accident occurred on screen, and yes, I got it right this time. I also thought Terrence was a very interesting non-real character, though I wished his CGI voice in season 21 had an American accent in the US dub because he was originally manufactured by Caterpillar Inc., which is an American company. Another interesting feature I like about Terrence besides his orange paint and treads is his widow's peak, which he no longer has in the CGI series. But that's okay, I don't mind it too much because it reminds me of his later appearances in the Christopher Audrey books. But the best part of this episode, in my opinion, is the overall message about not judging a book by its cover. In fact, it was so good that the original composers made a song about it based on Terrence's season 1 theme. And they certainly did a spot on job with that. Number 21 is the Flying Kipper. In my honest opinion, this is actually my favorite episode from season 1, not just because it's an important part of Henry's character arc, but I love the epic Flying Kipper theme as well as the suspenseful crash scene during the climax. This is actually the second episode to feature an accident on screen, the first one being Thomas Terrence in the Snow, aka Terrence the Tractor in the US dub. Though the funny thing is, in the original book, the people who were in the brake van didn't make it out safely. When Henry crashed into them, they landed head first in the snow. Luckily, no one got killed, but they were very cross with Henry for crashing into their train. Thankfully, Sir Tomahat wasn't cross with him, so he sent him to Crewe so that they could give him a bigger and newer firebox and that he won't need special Welsh coal anymore as a result. When Henry came back from Crewe, everyone clapped and cheered for his return to Sodor, much to Henry's happiness, though Gordon was jealous of him because of it, but that's another story. Overall, if you're a big fan of Henry the Green Engine or a fanatic about the Flying Kipper in general, then this will be the perfect episode for you. Number 20 is A New Friend for Thomas. Also known as Thomas and Trevor in the UK dub, this is a sequel to Save from Scrap. While that season 2 story originated from the Railway series, this one was originally written by Christopher Audrey in this annual series, and was unfortunately the only annual story to be adapted to television. Anyways, what I love about Thomas and Trevor is how the two characters were introduced to each other, and how they became good friends since. And just like with Terrence, Thomas learns how useful a traction engine could be. This is number 20 on the list because, as I said before, this is the only annual Thomas story to be adapted to television. I don't really know why though, but still, this is a nice episode nonetheless. Number 19 is Brake Fan. Also known as Donald and Douglas in the US dub, this episode marks the very first appearance of the Scottish twins, and the only appearance of the spiteful Brake Fan, aka the NW Brake Fan in wooden railway form. In this episode, Donald was so angry with the brake van that he pushed him very hard. That's what he gets for being a muckle nuisance. But one day, Donald had an accident with a signal box, leading James to do his work as well as his own. After James felt exhausted with some trucks in the brake van, he asked Douglas for help when they reached the top of Gordon's Hill, where the brake van finally meets its demise by being crushed to pieces by Douglas and never repaired again afterwards. Now that's what I call sweet revenge. But as a result, Sir Tomahat was having trouble making up his mind on which Caledonian twin to send away, but we're not here to talk about that today because I want to pick at least one Donald and Douglas episode for this list. You know what's funny? Despite the spiteful brake van being released in a few merchandises, particularly Ertl, Wooden Railway, and Bachman, for some odd reason, he was never released in Tomy Trackmaster form. I already complained about this in one of my top 10 videos, so I'll provide a link in the description below. And what's also funny is that the Missing Coach episode was cancelled during production because Barrowcroft thought it would be too confusing for the kids to understand, because at the end, Donald and Douglas switched tenders. To be fair, I don't blame her for making that decision in the first place. Otherwise, I'd be confused too. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind if they ever remake these stories in the future but with CGI animation and individual voice acting for the characters. That way, it will make things less confusing for the audience. Number 18. Edward's Exploit. This is my absolute favorite episode starring Edward in the classic era, even though Edward helps out as a close second. In this episode, after Bill and Ben took some tours to the China clay pits, Edward planned to take the visitors back home, but on the way, the weather changed for the worse, and Edward later had his crank pins broke in the middle of the storm, making it hard for Edward to pull the train. So, to resolve the issue, the crew loosened the couplings of the coaches just to make it easier for Edward to bring the whole train to the station on time. When they finally arrived, they were late, but the passengers were very grateful, and they thanked Edward and his crew for their best efforts. In all honesty, I thought this episode was intense and desperate because of Edward struggling to get the train to the station on time, but broke down temporarily in the middle of it all. And I always enjoyed episodes where the moral is that you can't give up no matter what the issue. And it also shows that Edward, despite his old age, can still be a very useful and resilient engine. And I'm quite resilient in real life myself, too. So therefore, Edward's Exploit is a must-watch for all fans of each generation. Number 17. Thomas Comes to Breakfast. This episode is phenomenal. It's about Thomas wishing that he could go on his own without a driver one day, only for it to get the best of him after crashing into a station master's house during breakfast time. Of course, Thomas didn't realize his driver was only joking about the engine managing without him at first, but this caused him a lot of trouble, thus leading to Sir Tom Had ordering a diesel rail car named Daisy to temporarily take his place while he is at the works. What makes this episode phenomenal is that in the Railway series lore, it makes perfect sense why engines like Thomas can't control themselves without a driver nor fireman, just like in real life. But what's strange about Season 2 was that this is the only season to feature the Farquhar sheds where Thomas, Percy, and Toby sleep in. I don't know why they decided to change that in Season 3 onwards, but it would have been nice to see these three sheds again in the future because they are part of Thomas's branch line after all. What's also interesting about this episode is that due to its popularity, it was released for Wooden Railway as well as a spin-off retelling from 1985. So if you're a true Thomas fan like me or are new to Thomas in general, then I highly recommend you give this one an honest chance because it was one of Reverend Wilbur Awdry's best stories from his books. Number 16. Alo Schaefer Duck. I've already talked about this in my top 5 favorite Duck episodes video, and I'll try to keep it brief here. I've always loved the Duck and the Diesel Engine trilogy, not only because of Devious Diesel being the first of his kind to come to Sodor, but because I think this episode starring Duck ended the trilogy on a perfect note. And as mentioned in that top 5 video, this episode is awesome, action-packed, and intense at the same time because of the chase sequence, which leads Duck to crash into the barber shop. Sir Tom Had came in and told the barber that Duck and his crew had prevented a serious accident, much to the barber's astonishment. And after Duck was rescued, Sir Tom Had told him that he never believed Diesel, so he sent him away, leading us to a very happy ending with Duck reuniting with his friends at Timmis Sheds. The funny thing is, Alo Schaefer Duck didn't get any merchandise until he Entertainment and Fisher-Price released Trademaster models of Duck with shaving cream on his face. Is that cool or what? By the way, I still have the Fisher-Price version of this toy, even though I can understand why many people prefer the original Hit Toys version of this model. And because of these reasons alone, Alo Schaefer Duck is not only my 16th favorite classic episode, but also the best Season 2 episode in my humble opinion. And if you're a big fan of Duck, aka Montague, then I highly suggest this episode along with the other stories from Duck and the Diesel Engine.